Hola, buenas noches. Bienvenidos a la conferencia magistral de Heidi Boisvert, titulada La cultura nos cambia, cómo las historias influyen en los corazones, las mentes y los cuerpos. Heidi Boisvert es una artista multidisciplinaria, diseñadora de experiencias y tecnología creativa. Está interesada en los efectos neurobiológicos y socioculturales de los medios de comunicación y la tecnología, en especial en estudiar el papel del cuerpo, de los sentidos y de las emociones en la percepción humana y el cambio social. En la actualidad está trabajando en el registro del primer genoma mundial de medios de comunicación, tomando en consideración las posibles implicaciones éticas que esto implica. Fundó el laboratorio Future Perfect, agencia creativa y grupo de reflexión que trabaja de la mano con organizaciones de justicia social, diseñando campañas en medios de comunicación emergentes y divertidos para transformar la imaginación del público.
Growing up in the 70s, I was drawn to three shows: Wonder Woman, Charlie's Angels, and The Bionic Woman. To me, the female protagonists appeared to be intelligent, able-bodied, and independent women who exhibited agency to wield power. As a tomboy, I identified with them, unaware that I had internalized the objectifying gaze of white, heteronormative male writers and their lighthearted, casually condoned culture of rape. They surreptitiously pushed my and generation of young men's buttons. Years later, while working in advertising, I discovered that pop culture could also be a guerrilla weapon to reverse engineer harmful narratives. To tackle this, I founded Future Perfect Lab. We harness the power of pop culture, emerging technology, and neuroscience to ignite social change by shifting cultural norms. Today, we're navigating a galaxy of chaotic and contradictory narratives that influence how we think, feel, live, and see ourselves in the world. We've moved from one-directional mass culture of the 70s to a ubiquitous culture of proximity. Influence now comes from anywhere or anyone. Celebrities, politicians, brands, and even nonprofits co-create and sometimes even compete with crowd culture. Because of this, people operate in vastly different narrative ecosystems, which lead to big differences in perception about themselves and the world. And many of these deep cultural narratives are toxic, often promoting harmful ideas about who we are, who belongs, and who does not. As a result, democracy is under attack, mental health is declining, neighbors can't agree on basic facts, and human rights are under assault. At Future Perfect Lab, we're dedicated to transforming toxic narratives through playful and imaginative experiences with the single aim of building a more just and pluralist society, one in which everyone not only belongs, but thrives. As a member of the Pop Culture Collaborative Network, we believe that specific pop culture stories shaped by narrative archetypes carry mental models into mass culture and then gradually spark inciting experiences that compel new behavioral instincts. We catalyze this spark by engineering social justice messages for mass appeal through a multi-pronged feedback loop consisting of creative campaigns and empirical research, supported by co-creation workshops and open source tools. On the creative side, we co-create long-term multimedia engagement campaigns in partnership with social justice organizations and media influencers through multiple touch points using games, virtual and augmented reality, transmedia storytelling, interactive web, locative media, theater, dance, and more. The first game we co-designed using this approach was intended to spark dialogue and create awareness of US immigration policies. Created with Breakthrough, a global human rights organization with over 150 undocumented youth, Iced, I Can End Deportation was a free 3D downloadable game. It taught players about current immigration laws on detention and deportation that affect legal permanent residents, asylum seekers, students, and undocumented people by violating human rights and denying due process. Game players could choose one of 5 characters to inhabit and live out the day-to-day life of an immigrant youth. The youth were being chased by immigration officers while making moral decisions and answering myth and fact questions about current immigration policies. If the player chose or answered incorrectly, they increased their chances of being thrown in detention. Once in detention, the players endured physical separation from their family, unjust conditions while awaiting, often for unknown amounts of time, the random outcome. Eventually, the player experienced an immigration hearing which determines the fate of their character, which were based on abstracted case studies of immigrants who had been deported. The game was played by 250,000 people in 100 countries and helped change the frame about what don't you understand about illegal to a conversation about due process. Next, we created a browser-based game in collaboration with two national immigration networks, Detention Watch Network and Rights Working Group. The goal of the interactive experience was to bring attention to the harsh, inhumane conditions being faced yearly by nearly 300,000 people in immigrant detention as a result of unfair Department of Homeland Security policies. In Homeland Guantánamos, the player is an immigrant in an immigrant detention center as an undercover journalist. They must find out about what happened to Boubacar Ba, a real man who died in detention. They start with the redacted file. Once inside, a guide shows the player around, and they can pick from several rooms to explore. In each room, they hear real stories of pregnant women being forced to give birth in shackles, HIV patients being denied medication, teenagers being separated from their families, and war veterans being placed in solitary confinement for challenging abuse. Then they are asked a series of questions about what they heard. If they answer correctly, they're given an item. The item can be used to reveal clues. Once they collect all the items and all the clues are revealed, the journal is filled in with the information needed to publish an expose about the unfair detention standards that caused Boubacar's death. The game was used as a mobilizing tool by 300 organizations and helped change immigrant detention standards in the United States. We also created an animation series with Bad Monkey Studio to raise awareness about unfair immigration laws by teledeporting Spock. The short animations were played before feature films at major movie theaters in the US as a new advocacy tactic. After these early projects, I wanted to figure out how to make the social justice messages less overt, less like chocolate-covered broccoli. At Breakthrough, I was given the opportunity to co-create America 2049, a groundbreaking alternate reality game on Facebook that presents a near future America at a dangerous crossroads. Human rights are in peril. Democracy is on the brink of destruction. The player is an agent on the Council on American Heritage. Tasked with the capture of a presumed terrorist, they are sent into high-risk situations. America 2049 was the first Facebook game to integrate social networking platforms with many other resources, both online and offline, like multimedia and interactive features, clues planted across the internet, and real-life events at leading cultural institutions nationwide, like Ellis Island. The game featured appearances by well-known actors like Harold Perrineau from Lost, Victor Garber from Alias, Cherry Jones, 24, Anthony Rapp from Rent, and the comedian Margaret Cho, who all donated their time to put a face on these complex issues. Before the game was launched, we created a trailer to seed curiosity. It was posted on YouTube's homepage for a week and garnered over 50,000 views, enabling us to get thousands of players signed up for the game. We created fake job posts and numerous fictional web pages to build a community and provide backstory. The game was played over 12 weeks. Each week, the player received a mission about a different human rights violation from their boss. And they used their terminal to navigate and communicate with other agents and sources. It also possessed a basic clue and puzzle structure and used a chatbot to enable players to communicate with other agents. There were cryptographs and mini games players had to crack to progress through the levels, and some of the clues had embedded messages inside. And there were even 4chan-style back channel where the underground organization Divided We Fall communicated, providing another layer of narrative. We also created a search engine called Zuglio and a tongue-in-cheek curriculum styled after the comedic Daily Show with Take Actions. During the first 12 weeks of the game, it educated over 30,000 players about the enduring struggle for civil and cultural pluralism. Then we worked on a variety of projects for specific locations and audiences. For instance, Cubaville, sponsored by USAID, was a multiplayer real-time strategy game that drew on political simulation mechanics and speculative fiction conceits to cultivate agency and leadership skills aimed at building civil society in Cuba. Set in a parallel universe ripe with ghosts and zombies, players are tasked with missions to uncover clues and crack puzzles in order to acquire the experience and knowledge needed to establish and maintain sustainable governance. Players level up by making ethical decisions, strategically using resources and building their character's influence through goodwill and social capital. Based on our audience research, we discovered that young people, 18 to 34-year-olds, shared games via jump drives at ICTs. So we virally propagated the game via airdropping these jump drives with the game loaded to centers. Next, we worked on At Home with the Kindling Group, which combined documentary film, digital organizing, and a smartphone game to change perceptions of homelessness by exploring the issue in the first person. It was co-created with 100,000 Homes and the National Coalition on Homelessness. The location-based augmented reality mobile app was made with custom software well before Pokemon Go became a hit. When you launched the app, it located you and mapped the experience to the player's city. It then overlaid video triggers of homeless individuals' stories. Hearing from homeless men and women about their experiences and seeing for yourself the toll of homelessness in your city. The geolocated real-world game was designed to help players recognize that they can play a part in ending homelessness where they live. The players worked with virtual characters they met while navigating their city to help a homeless individual in the game into housing. Every player also had a real-world impact, as players collected household items for a virtual inventory like dishes and pillows and towels. They were raising funds for an actual moving kit to help homeless individuals in their community into housing based on a vulnerability index and list determined by our partner organizations. In the aftermath of Katrina, we worked with Joe Liu Productions and urban planners in New Orleans on Land of Opportunity, a multimodal platform that enabled users, diggers and doers to engage with, as well as create and share targeted media to support both educational and advocacy efforts about post-crisis environments. The site was comprised of 3 distinct but interrelated modular tools pulled from a single database of both curated and user-generated content. The 3 modules consisted of an interactive video player that enabled contextualized viewing and collaborative storytelling, a campaign builder that facilitated the creation of a shareable quantitative and qualitative snapshot targeted at gatekeepers, and a predictive timeline that highlighted the post-disaster reconstruction lifecycle of Katrina as a baseline with future post-disaster and urban redevelopment timelines, allowing users to conduct a comparative analysis to offer insights for future early warning intervention at critical stages. The site allowed you to watch documentary footage with contextual content at key points in the timecode, where the user encountered blue lines linked to data, another video, graphics, or photos that are associated with that original content. In addition, the user could add comments as they're watching, like in SoundCloud, and also view content along a crisis timeline to examine the parallels that occur related to disaster capitalism. In addition to the web-based virtual strategies, I began bringing people into physical spaces to explore the role the body played in social change processes by first turning to dance as an experimental sandbox. Radical Science of Life was the first large-scale interactive multimedia performance I made. Through responsive dance, Radical attempted to externalize the mind's non-hierarchical distribution of thought. Music was generated from the dancer's muscles and blood flow via biophysical sensors that captured sound waves from the performers' bodies. This data triggered complex neural patterns to be projected onto multiple screens in 3D imagery. As the audience interacts with the images produced, they enter into a dialogue with the dancers. Conceptually, the piece was an embodied examination of self-organizing systems and the increasing disparity between the encroachment of biodata and the quiet discord of biomemory. The work revealed the dangerous legacy of cybernetics and awakened an urgent need for inserting the body and affect into technology before technology further embeds itself inside of us. My collaborator, Marco Donnarumma, and I created these wireless prototypes of the Xsense using custom wireless transmitters and Arduinos. Each dancer wore 2 sensors on different parts of the body to explore different sonic texture. The data was sent to Pure Data, where the signal is amplified and filtered. Then features were extracted and mapped to both musical and visual parameters. Next, the data was sent over something called Open Sound Protocol to 2 systems to generate the visuals and processing in the music and Max MSP to create a real-time immersive spatialized composition and generative visuals based on biological algorithms that spawn from the dancers' bodies. The choreography was based on game rules with distinct trajectories, and dancers were responding to cues from one another and the environment. The audience could also co-create the work with the 4 Microsoft Kinects above the pool of water, using their own movement to control the AI creatures. As the performers moved through the space, the force of their collective muscle contractions caused memory engrams to trigger on the back wall. Inside the connective tissue of these bodies were another layer of imagery, hidden pain. Next, I wanted to apply what I learned from Radical and the body back to my work in social justice and pop culture space. So I collaborated on Beware of the Dandelions with Complex Movements, a collective from Detroit. The goal of this immersive theater project was to teach social justice movement building through complex science. Through a sci-fi parable, the work integrates a data-driven narrative with game-based collaborative problem solving, communicated through live hip hop and DJ performances. The participant players control a 3D game engine projection mapped onto a 24 by 12 foot sentient pod. Players spatially trigger real-time story content consisting of data visualization, surveillance cameras, systems communication, embedded clues and puzzles, and embodied social interactions. They are tasked with interpreting the flow of nonlinear information via hip-hop lyrics to make sense of the narrative in order to act collectively to transform the framework of the AI system, a metaphor for systems of oppression. As the work travels, the performance pod also functions as an interactive installation and community space where participants contribute their own stories, which become memory maps that get integrated into the show. Next, I realized that at the root of all the social justice issues I was working on was epigenetic trauma, and that our bodies were actually archives of story. Walking Wounded served as both a living lab and multimedia performance, transforming trauma through movement, sound, and imagery generated from the performer's somatic and autonomic nervous system. It sought to give expression to unspeakable personal and collective experiences of trauma, transforming unbearable pain and toxic shame through bioadaptive play. The piece explored the interplay between ghost stories and ritual to bring audiences on a cross-cultural journey through a subterranean underground where participants collectively exorcise ghosts, signifiers of trauma, using biotechnology to redefine performance and narrative architecture. It sought to restore nonverbal interpersonal connection in a safe environment, foster resilient communities, and bring movement into movement building through a 4-part co-design process, culminating in a nonlinear performance. The project also sought to address the absence of truth and reconciliation in the United States by bringing a shared space for communal healing based on decolonized somatics and aesthetics. It is a performance devised not from familiar tropes, but from the physicality of the storytellers' bodies, fostering the examination and evisceration of the legacy of lived, intergenerational, and epigenetic trauma stored in our collective and individual bodies. Finally, I'm currently collaborating on Theater of the Mind, an immersive journey in a 15,000 square foot installation, exploring how our minds see and create the world around us as participants traverse unique environments and try a series of sensory experiments. The production is co-created by David Byrne and Mala Guankar and based on a series of neuroscience experiments. I'm responsible for developing the technology that supports the show. I ensure the sets, lights, sounds, and physical objects demonstrating scientific effects actually work. I also built a custom show control system to trigger environmental cues and architected network infrastructure to run the show. The August premiere, however, has been pushed to 2022 due to COVID. So moving on to workshops, we kick off every culture change campaign that I just shared with you using play as process, a multimodal co-creation workshop with a meshwork of influencers, key stakeholders around a given issue. Play as process consists of the following building blocks. We first humanize the primary audience. We get at our core values, what we call VPSA, value, problem, solution, action. Then we crack the culture code, which is based on Clotaire-Raphael's theories. And then we move on to unearthing systems thinking. From there, we design a paper and physical prototypes, and we play test each team's experience. Through this multi-part process, we move subject matter experts from rational and emotional problem solving towards complex system and embodied design. And eventually rapid prototyping, which enables us to more closely map social issues to story design and interactive mechanics to increase authentic engagement, behavior change, and learning outcomes. We're currently making a deck of cards for communities to run these workshops on their own. On the research side, we conduct media effects and audience research using survey and story coding instruments, coupled with biometric and linguistic analysis to inform narrative design, story creation, distribution, and audience engagement plans. Central to this research is our Limbic lab, a biometric lab, an AI system that isolates the narrative ingredients that move us to act. The Limbic lab consists of two components, a narrative engine and a media machine. The narrative engine takes in and syncs real-time data from brainwaves, biophysical data like heart rate, blood flow, body temperature, and muscle contraction, as well as eye tracking and facial recognition, while a subject is viewing or interacting with media content. Data is captured at key places in the time code where critical plot points, character interaction, or unusual camera angles occur. Survey data on that person's political beliefs, along with their psychographic and demographic profiles, are integrated into the system to gain a deeper understanding of the individual. The media machine, the second component, then uses predictive models and machine learning to automate media production processes. The goal of this research is to find out what combination of narrative ingredients are the most appealing and galvanizing to specific intended audiences to enable us, and by extension, the field of social justice, cultural, and educational organizations to create more effective media. For the study on episodic TV, Are You What You Watch?, we conducted with the Norman Lear Center, we surveyed 3,096 participants across the study. Using statistical clustering, we revealed 3 distinct groups: reds, blues, and purples. We discovered that all 3 groups aligned around 5 cultural touchstones: America's Funniest Home Videos, Bones, Criminal Minds, Mythbusters, and Pawn Stars. But they all watched for very different reasons. We also discovered that Americans shifted left, for us that means more progressive, over the past 10 years. Contrary to what you see in the media, which says that we were very divided. The 9 areas the 9 areas of these entrenched positions softened on 9 key areas, which included more resources for the environment, regulation of business, cautions of new technology, need for gun legislation, support for public education, and abortion rights. These are some of the high-level findings that connect social justice issues to patterns of viewership. For instance, Americans who believe that women's primary responsibility is to her children and home are more likely to watch 4 reality TV shows: Wipeout, Ridiculousness, Cake Boss, and So You Think You Can Dance. Those who believe immigrants want to work for a better life are more likely to watch Saturday Night Live, The Tonight Show, Modern Family, Game of Thrones, and The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Respondents who rank race among their least important issues prefer NCIS, The Big Bang Theory, The Walking Dead, and Law and Order SVU. We have 37 issue areas we can examine in relation to their viewing preferences, and also correlate with participants' real-time biometric data, social conversations, and linguistic analysis, and a linguistic analysis of the scripts. That said, we make all of our research instruments, methodologies, and scientific protocols open source for the culture change field. This includes our scene-by-scene story coding and survey instruments by genre, as well as biophysical sensors for measurement, like the XSense I co-created with Marco Donnarumma, and custom Python scripts for both machine learning and linguistic analysis. And our latest initiative, the Media Genome, spearheaded by our CTO, Natalia Rodriguez, will render the database of media imprints accessible to social justice organizations, journalists, media makers, and academics to conduct their own correlation mapping between variables to generate real-time data visualizations. Users will be able to customize their queries by genre, demographic, and psychographic data. They will also be able to analyze biophysical data scene by scene. We are developing the front end as part of 4 new remote studies focused on understanding the effects of creating pluralist archetypes and pro-social mental models. And as a result of COVID, Natalia and I pivoted from our in-person biometric field studies to remote, and also decided to apply our predictive models and machine learning algorithms from the Limbic lab to Lean On, an open source discovery platform designed to optimize coordination and connection between individuals and organizations for mutual aid. It uses natural language processing to create smart recommendations to coordinate, connect, and catalyze individual and organizational engagement through a real-time map with dynamic data visualizations that enable autonomous communities to track impact for needs assessment. Our machine learning algorithm also helps grassroots organizers make predictions to prepare for future crisis management. In addition to the tools for research and analysis, we also build custom instruments with sound designers like Kevin Patton to help us understand and recenter the body's intelligence. Through this unique interdisciplinary strategy, which integrates art, science, and technology, and centers the body, affect, and our senses, we've increased awareness of hot-button issues and changed the attitudes of millions of people in 166 countries through inventive, one-off culture change campaigns. After 15 years, we're poised to employ our methodology for other issues like healthcare and climate change, as well as in different cultural contexts. But we can also expand our reach and impact in the future. First, we will move away from one-off projects with a limited shelf life and media buzz by mobilizing small, medium, and large-scale social justice organizations to pool resources and unify message frames so that we can radically shift cultural norms and social behaviors. Second, we will make our research more accessible to increase media literacy and help combat mis and disinformation. So in addition to building out the front end for the media genome, I'm collaborating with veteran New York Times journalist Julie Skelfo to develop a podcast series called Get Media Savvy. The series will awaken audiences to the social, cultural, and neurobiological effects of media and technology and provide them with strategies for taking back control of their cognitive and affective faculties. Because pop culture and emerging technology are integral parts of our public and private life, I believe they are, without a doubt, vehicles to achieving lasting social change. I hope to continue using them ethically and intentionally to transform our narrative galaxy from harmful messages into narrative medicine. Thank you for your aroused EEG signals and dilated pupils.
I was wondering, how do you deal with, like you were saying that in this feedback that you can give the writers to create new contents that aspire to be more social, just. How do you deal with this? I don't know, because at the end of the day, the media landscape has a very financial trigger, or that they are moved by money mostly, no, in terms of audiences and content and the relationship between content and profit. So how does this justice, social justice, finds its way through this money-driven landscape?
Yeah, so I mean, all of the projects that I outlined in the kind of case study section are free and open, right? There's no monetization scheme as such, right? They're really for communities, and they're typically supported through grant funding. But I think the other question you raised, you know, how does this content find a mass audience that is based on, you know, monetization schemes? So one of the ways, so, you know, as I mentioned, I'm sort of part of this larger network called Pop Culture for Social Change, or like the Pop Culture Collaborative. And one of their mandates is, in addition to funding, you know, research, they also fund pipeline development, and they also fund getting organizations into writers' rooms to inform content within like Hollywood and other spaces. And so I think it's not, you know, one answer. There's like a multiplicity of different types of touch points that, you know, are trying to help shape a more pluralist society, right? To create more authentic representational content than what we have seen in the past. I think one thing that we're, to some extent, maybe trying to model is something that happened post-World War II in the United States. It was called the American Way campaign. This is when, you know, all the soldiers started coming home from the war, and we needed to get women back in the home. And, you know, Madison Avenue emerged and all of that. And so that campaign to kind of rebrand America, right, was done by integrating, by having, you know, advertising, Hollywood, all of these different types of sectors, along with behavioral psychologists, social scientists, and then, you know, all kind of collaborating, right, to essentially kind of transform the narrative, right, around the United States. And I think, so part of what I guess I was advocating for at the end is, you know, much of the work that's happened within the culture change space when we're doing these projects, they're very like one-off. So for instance, you know, like ICE came out, there was tons of press and we had lots of people play and download the game and all of that. But then, you know, a month or two later, there weren't many people playing the game, and then there wasn't really any policy change, right, that resulted from that. So I think, you know, having done this for many, many years, I think what I've been thinking a lot about lately is that we can't keep competing for resources from limited funding networks, right? We should actually, when we look at a particular issue, right, what we should be doing is pooling resources from small, medium, and large-scale organizations, getting on the same message frame, and then creating large-scale multimedia engagement campaigns over many years, similar to the American Way campaign, if we're really going to move the agenda on specific issue areas. And so I think this is a learning that I've come to, you know, after many, many years. So I think, you know, that is one way, I guess I would suggest. It's a roundabout way to answer your question. One way to address the issue of how do you compete with the big budgets of, you know, Hollywood. It's about, you know, how do you get those strategic partners on board, right, to change the narratives that are currently kind of toxic and harmful, to create new type of content, right, that is actually more pro-social and advocates pluralism, really, I guess, at root.
Yeah, and considering that nowadays these digital platforms of entertainment like Netflix, Amazon, and Disney Plus, and everything is, well, it's a world phenomenon, no? So how does this effort that you made, like, how far do you aim now that we live in this global community, no?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I think we should be thinking more globally and also intersectionally about many of the issues that we work on, right? So, for instance, you know, take women's rights, for instance, right? We see the same, especially, you know, in terms of COVID right now, we've seen, because we've been in lockdown, we've seen a rise and an increase in domestic violence. And it's not just isolated to the United States, it's global, right, as a result of this global pandemic. So I see a real need for starting to create these multimedia engagement campaigns that cut across borders, right? That move across borders, so that they're, and one of the things I guess I'll say, when we were working on Bell Bajao at Breakthrough, which was looking at domestic violence in India, that the campaign was, you know, was very successful in India, but it was hard to sort of translate the nuance of the media to other cultural contexts, right? So I think, you know, while I think it's really important to think kind of globally across these issue areas and build these engagement campaigns across borders, I think we also have to understand the cultural sensitivities and specificities of of specific countries, right? And so I think it would be interesting, you know, to start building coalitions, right, that are sort of beyond national in scope, that are international, to start thinking through how do we create content that could be more universally resonant, right? But I think, yeah, so I guess my work is definitely, I mean, what I'm interested in and what I think is that the community of what I call culture change, folks that are working in the space for many, many years, are really interested in moving mass audiences. But at the same time, we also realize that we're moving towards what I see as more personalized content, right? And so part of the impulse behind, developing the narrative engine and then building out the media machine piece is that I can take content that is being mass, it's intended for mass audience, but what if we could actually reverse that, right? And understand audiences enough to create content that was personalized to the individual based on their own specific media DNA. So that's the whole flip side. Well, for many years I've been working in this mass audience. I actually think we're not realizing, that our efforts actually need to shift to respond to, right, the current over personalization of content that's happening in other spaces beyond film and TV, right, in the digital domain.
I find super interesting this concept that you're talking about, the media DNA. Is like, what does that make us as human? No, like, we're so connected to these entertainment industries and data and digital environments that we are also changing the way we are self-perceived, no?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, one of the, I think, mistakes we make as content creators is to assume that the audience is tabula rasa. Like every time you create content, they've never seen content before.
Exactly.
Right. And so I think what I'm trying to get at here is like, if we can understand enough about people's media consumption habits, like over time, right, then you start seeing all of the different types of content, that's come before, that's actually informing how they're responding to the content at that moment. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think, that's an impossible metric to capture, but I do see there's potential for that. I guess that's why, I was thinking about the media genome and like building a database. And if we could understand an individual, right, who's consuming different types of content over time, what can we learn about them, right? Their habits, their behaviors, and how different types of content is informing and sometimes triggering, right, certain behaviors that make them act in a certain way. So, but that's kind of like the holy grail, I guess, to try to figure out how can you get the historicity of a single individual's media consumption habits to be able to identify their specific media DNA to then generate content that bioadapts specific to their own interests and needs, right? How do you move them?
And also how to, like what you were saying, transform our society, to give to open spaces and reflect on the actuality of what we're living and how we are able to improve, as a society and come together and find ways to live better and to improve our living experience, and also our media consumption experience, because that is not going anywhere.
Yeah, I know. And in fact, I guess I was going to incorporate into the presentation, I mean, one of the things that's prompted me to sort of want to understand, the role of the body and social change processes and how different types of media is affecting us on a cognitive and affective level is because of a great concern I had for, all of the different devices, what I call intelligent technology, right, that are part of our everydayness, and the ways in which, they were affecting literally like the gray matter in our brain, right? They're eroding parts of the amygdala and the hippocampus region of the brain that is responsible for emotion regulation and activation. And they're also responsible for our ability to kind of make knowledge schemas. And so my research, like my PhD research, was really trying to understand you know, how media and technology was affecting us on a neurobiological level. And I think what I'm trying to do, perhaps, you know, with the new research, the new empirical research, is that if I can actually understand how this media, right, and the technology that's being used to communicate the media is affecting individuals, then we can find a way of sort of redirecting, right, the trajectory of how media is harming us, not only in terms of like the content itself, right, but in terms of the erosion of these particular areas in the brain. So part of the reason why I started moving back towards dance is because I discovered that movement actually is an antidote, right? It's our ability to kind of breathe, the line, and all of those things is actually a potential antidote to the kind of shrinking of the gray area matter. In fact, it has the opposite effect.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, if I can start understanding, you know, how can we build an embodied theory of social change? How can we understand the role the body is actually playing in that? So can we actually create content, right, that can be experienced in an embodied way that is imbued with these positive social values that then also helps us restore what I was calling critical feeling, right, our capacity for empathy with another, so that we could move people in a larger way on these issues. So it's, to me, it's all intertwined, even though it perhaps seems as though they're like very separate domains. But I think my concern was that, you know, I had been using all of these technologies, you know, like the games I mentioned, using mobile devices or web things, and they were also disconnected from my body, and that I was seeing kind of the damage, the underlying damage of using those devices over time. So so now I'm trying to figure out, like, if we can learn enough, we have enough data points to understand what's happening, you know, neurobiologically, then how can we create content that can change the trajectory of not only technology, but the content that we communicate through that technology. So I don't know if that makes any sense. It was a little bit circular, but I think for me, that's my connection to movement and dance and like the role that it plays in my process.
So we should all start dancing now in our enclosure pandemic environment.
We definitely should be. Yes.
A little bit of texting and a little bit of dancing won't harm us.
Yeah, well, it's one way of alleviating, like, you know, techno stress, which is what's happening right now, right? We're all, our entire life is mediated through this Zoom window, right? And it's very disembodying. And we haven't, you know, I think hopefully there will be some studies where people are looking at the long-term effects, right, of communicating, living our lives online in this way.
Yeah, emotionally and physically, no? Like you were saying, with our brains, what happens?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's also a place too for thinking about reentry. You know, as we start to reenter, what are the social choreographies, the rituals that we need to be able to restore, right? So that we're able to engage with one another in 3D and physical space again. Because part of like what my research actually discovered was that, you know, even having the computer for all of the things prior to the pandemic, people were more telematically engaged with computers than they were actual human beings, that we were losing our capacity for social emotional competence. So, you know, now we have the pandemic where this is a necessity, right? So my thought is, you know, the vast majority of society is going to, has become probably socially and emotionally incompetent, right? And so there's a lot of work to do around reentry to learn how to re-engage with one another in physical space.
Okay, Heidi, very interesting and a lot to think about. I want to thank you in name of the ALEPH Festival for this amazing talk, and congratulations for the work that you are doing for every one of us, reflecting on what society is and our media engagement affects, no?